What we're going to do today is we're going to focus on the focus and directrix of a parabola. We're also going to be graphing parabolas. Now we have our general vertex form, y equals a x minus h plus k. We're also going to be working with x equals a, and then it would be y minus k, and then squared, and then plus h. This is going to cause us a little bit of a problem because we have to recognize that the k always goes with the y and the h always goes with the x. But we'll get to that when we get over to letter C. But for example one, finding the focus and directrix is going to be similar to what we have on the notes. How we're going to find the focus is our h value and k plus p. P is 1 over 4a. So whatever our a value is, we times it by 4. Then our directrix is a horizontal line if it's y equals, or if it's x equals, then it's a vertical line. Now, what the focus and directrix is that when we have a parabola, and let's pretend that our parabola is a satellite dish. If we have rays coming in to the parabola, they're always going to hit it. And with the reflection, it's always going to end up hitting the focus. The directrix is a line that is equidistant from the focus to the parabola. So if this distance right here, the focus to the parabola, is also the same distance as the directrix to the parabola. So this distance right here is also the same as that distance right there. And that's the relationship between the two. Now, when we're trying to find it, what we're going to do is we're going to put it in vertex form, similar to what we did last time. So we're going to get the y by itself. So I have y equals negative x squared plus 8x plus 3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a 1, I should say a negative 1, and that becomes x squared minus 8x. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to find my new c value. If you remember, we take our b value divided by 2, and we square it. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16. Then I have my plus 3. Now I have a problem. What I did was I added a 16 on this side, so what I need to do is add a 16 on the other. But I'm actually going to add a negative 16. And the reason why is because this is a 16, but it's in a parenthesis. And outside the parenthesis is a negative 1. Negative 1 times 16 is negative 16. And that's why I have a negative 16 on the left-hand side. I'm going to do 2 steps in one. My first step is I'm going to factor it. So I have negative 1, or just a negative, and then I have x minus 4 squared. My next step is I'm going to add 16 on both sides. When I add the 16, what I get is 19. So what that gives me is my vertex. And my vertex is 4 and 19. Now, once I have my vertex, finding the focus and directrix isn't too bad. If you're looking at the formula, what we notice is that with our vertex, it would be hk. With our focus, it's h and then k plus p. So notice that the h values are the same. So when I'm finding my focus, I have my 4. Then if you look right here, I have k plus p. So I have my 19 plus my p-value. Well, my p-value is 1 over 4 times a. So if I'm trying to find my a value, notice the a value is in front, so that's a negative 1. So I have 1 over 4 times negative 1. And that, of course, is negative 1/4. So that means my focus is 4. 19 plus negative 1/4 is going to be 18 and 3/4. Now, finding the directrix. The directrix is always a horizontal line, or it's going to be a vertical line. In this case, because it's y equals, it's going to be a horizontal line. And it's our k value, which is 19. And this time we're going to subtract the p value, which, since this is negative 1/4, when we subtract a negative, it becomes a positive. So our horizontal line is 19 and 1/4. So that's how we find our focus and our directors. Now, looking at our second one, we're going to get the y by itself. So I'm going to subtract the 1/2 x squared. Then I'm going to divide it by negative 1. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a half. This is a little tricky. Factoring is the same thing as dividing. So if I were to divide this by 1/2, I'm really multiplying it by 2. And I'm going to find my new c value. My c value is my b value divided by 2 squared. Now remember, because this is a positive 9, I have to add 9 on the other side. But we have to be careful because my a value is 1/2. So that would be halves. So I'm going to do 2 steps in one again. First going to factor it. And that gives me x minus 3 squared. Then I'm going to subtract the 9/2. Now remember, 9/2 is the same thing as 4.5. So if I were to subtract it, I get negative 6.5. So that means that my vertex is 3 and negative 6.5. So once I have my vertex, the focus isn't that bad. In order to find the focus, 3 stays the same. And I take the negative 6.5 and my p-value. If I'm looking at this, this is 1/2. So what I have is I'm adding 1 over 4 times a half. Half of 4 is 2. So negative 6.5 plus a half would be negative 6. And then for my directrix, I have y equals. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the negative 6.5. I'm going to subtract the 1/2. Remember, the 1/2 is coming right here. 4 times a half is 2. So that would be 1/2. And that, of course, gives me y equals negative 7. Now for letter C, once again, this one's a little tricky because we have to change our formula around. So since it's x equals, it's y, and then what we have is our kh value. It's still plotted the same way as hk. So looking at this, first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a 4. I'm going to find my new c value. I'm going to take my 2, divide it by 2, I'm going to square it. Now, once again, a lot of you have probably noticed it. I added a 1. Since it's in parentheses and there's a 4 in the front, I really added a 4. I'm going to do 2 steps in one. I'm going to factor it. And then I'm going to subtract the 4. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. For the vertex, this right here is the opposite. So that's -1. That's my y value. This right here stays the same. That's my x value. So that's my vertex. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my focus. Focus is going to change because it's no longer going up and down. Since it's x equals, it's now going left or it's going to go right. Because it's a positive, that tells us it's going to go right, but we're not going to graph it yet. So that means that when we're looking at this, what we're going to do is we're going to be fixing our front number. So we're going to take this value right here, which is our h value, and what we're going to do is we're going to add it. Right here is our a value, which is 4, and we times it by 4, so that would be 1 over 4 times 4, which is 1 over 16. So that means my focus is -5, 1, oops, -4, and 15 over 16, and -1. And my directrix be x equals instead of y equals. I'm going to take the -5. This time I'm going to subtract the 1 over 16. And so that gives me x equals -5 and 1/16. And that's my focus and directrix.